It's every parent's nightmare, isn't it? One of the great joys of being a parent is seeing your kids discover their passion, to figure out their why and to go out and make their dreams come true. And even if that stretching of the wings means that they move to the other side of the world, you're thrilled for them, you're happy for them. But if tragedy strikes, that distance can seem like a never-ending chasm and can seem insurmountable. And that is the situation facing the parents and the direct family and extended family this week of Tom Frith. Tom is a former Dalby man, former student of Toowoomba Grammar here in this part of the world, who discovered a love for flying and a love particularly for flying helicopters at a relatively young age, and was fulfilling that dream and living his best life in Canada until tragedy struck this week, and Tom was killed in a tragic helicopter accident, not of his own fault at all. It's a tragic story, but I recorded a wonderful chat with Tom's aunt, Elspeth Murray, yesterday, paying tribute to Tom and his incredible life. And we started off by talking about when his fascination and passion for flying actually began.
When he left school, he went to Toowoomba Grammar, and when he left school he was doing farming, and then he decided he wanted to be a pilot, so he got into Griffith University to study aviation. And then the family were doing a trip up to the Gulf and called into Ascot Station and saw chopper pilots in action, and Tom went, that's for me. And so he quit uni and got a job, learnt to fly a chopper, and he worked for about 5 years out of Cloncurry doing helicopter mustering, and then decided he wanted to keep going and to advance his career. Decided that Canada was the place to be, so he went to Canada about 5 or 6 years ago to continue his career in helicopter flying. And he had this amazing time up in Cloncurry doing helicopter mastering. My brother Pete and his wife Jan, went up to visit a couple of times, and were just horrified to see how, it's a real daredevil sport when they're just going in and out of the trees, ducking in, no doors on the choppers, just bringing wild cattle in, which was very different from the life he then led when he got to Canada.
So he went to Canada, and looking at the website of the company that he worked for, it looks like they do just about everything. Was that the attraction, like a greater variety of work in this field that he loved?
His intention really was to increase his skills and go up the size of helicopter. Ultimately, he'd always planned to come back and live in Australia, but by actually getting experience in the biggest and the more technical choppers, he really was opening up his future career of working back in Australia. And so the Bell 212, or the Huey, the choppers that were from Vietnam days, that was his favourite craft, and that was the craft he was actually flying on the day he died. But literally he went to Canada to get greater experience. And he did, as you said, Great Slave Helicopters did amazing things. He did some extraordinary things, like he did quite a lot of rescue work. That Great Slave would often go out to rescue people that had been, stranded or, whatever out in the wilds of Canada. He did a lot of research jobs. He'd report back. One, he was out with scientists counting caribou or wolverines. Right up near the Arctic Circle. Some of the other things he did, the boys were telling me tonight about when he often would take scientists out, and they'd be counting stuff in the lakes. So he'd land the craft with the skids on for landing on the water. The scientists would be taking all the samples, and he'd have his fishing rod in the back, and he'd be fishing off the back end of the lake while they're taking their samples. So, he was always someone that got the most out of every opportunity.
Yeah.
One of the other things he did was he was the pilot for one of the Canadian series of Alone. When they send them out into the wilderness. So he was the helicopter pilot on that, doing that sort of stuff as well. So
wow.
It was a great variety. He loved it, but a lot of it was firefighting. I mean, we've only watched the news, and there's just been so many bushfires in Canada, not just this season, but over all the years he's been there. So for quite a big period of the summer, he did a lot of work with fighting fires, actually putting the fires out by scooping the water out of the lakes and things and dropping it. And that's what he was in the middle of. He was right up, way north of where he even usually is, right up on the Canadian-Alaskan border at Fort Good Hope when the accident occurred that took his life. So.
But again, expanding his skills. I mean, that's another area that I guess you could learn in Australia. But it was just ever increasing his skill base.
Yeah, and he was well regarded. He'd been with Great Slave for about 5 years, and he was well regarded in there and loved his job. He met his Canadian wife, Julia, at a music festival not long after he got to Yellowknife, and they've since married and had 2 beautiful children. George is nearly 3 and Eli's 8 months, which is, really tough for the whole family to know that they're going to, grow up without their amazing father.
Absolutely, yeah. But it does sound like Canada proved to be, the promised land really for him.
Look, it was, but he was very much an Australian boy. He would come home every second winter. He'd come home for and have a couple of months back in Australia. He was due to come back just in his brother Oliver is getting married in November, and he was due to be a groomsman at his brother's wedding. So we were all looking forward to having him back, and so he's always come regularly, and we all know Julia well and the boys, and we're hoping that Julia will. She says that she wants the boys to always know their 4 amazing uncles and the extended family here. So we're hoping that we'll still see them back in Australia a lot.
That's terrific. That's great. It sounded like he was, his life was going incredibly well in terms of career and obviously his personal life.
Yeah, he was a real role model too. Everyone loved Tom, and he was the eldest of 5 boys. His brothers Fergus, Ollie, Harry, and Doogs all really looked up to Tom. And even though he was often on remote jobs for long periods, he'd be away from home for a month at a time, out on a research job or fighting the fires or whatever it might be. But whenever he could, he kept in contact with his parents and his brothers, and he was just such an amazing part of the family that we're all really feeling his passing a lot.
I can well imagine. Did he? I'm just curious. Did he ever get a chance to take any of his family up? Well, his family back here up in a helicopter.
Well, they'd been up with him when he was working in Cloncurry.
Right.
My brother had been up with him then, but Pete and Jan, his parents, had been over with him last year, and they had been lined up to actually go up with him in a flight, and then all the choppers were called out, and so he didn't get to take Pete and Jan up, but they, he'd taken his son up before, and
wow.
But not in Canada. We hadn't. None of us had been up with him, though. His youngest brother Doog had just recently been visiting them. He's in Canada at the moment, and so Doogs had spent quite a bit of time with them just recently, which is nice. But yeah. But we're all going over for the wrong reason now, and we won't see him.
Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear that. And it must be so much more, devastating when this happens on the other side of the world. For all those practical reasons, it just
David,
makes it so much harder. Yeah.
And being so far away, no information coming through. Hard for a parent to realise that they're no longer the next of kin, so no one actually has to tell you anything.
Yeah.
That's been pretty tough as well. But Tom's wife, Julia, was with her parents at Newfoundland, which is on the other side of the country, when Tom's accident occurred. So it took her nearly 2 days to get home, just because she went from one of the most remote parts of Canada back into civilization, another remote part of Canada. So there was more than 20 where Pete and Jan were just desperate for information, so far away, and just nothing getting through. So it's been a very traumatic last 4 days for them and the rest of the family.
I can imagine, Elspeth. I think any parent listening, and obviously there's probably the majority of the audience, that situation, they're probably thinking, there, but for the grace of God go I. So it'd be an awful situation to be in the dark like that. Yeah,
we're a big, very loving family, and but I'm one of 6, and there's 17 grandchildren, and there's 7.5 great grandchildren, and we're all really close, and everyone's still in their original marriages, and we've just had this, like a really close, loving existence. So,
how will Tom be remembered by the family if?
With great love and affection. He was an absolute rascal. Oldest of 5 boys. He got those 5 boys into so much trouble growing up. He was always the ringleader. That, he was a daredevil. He grabbed every opportunity by the horns and handsome, anything, and charismatic, and he was just an amazing young man. That's why we can't just believe he's gone. And to hear that, I know that there's an investigation going, but right up front, Great Slaves helicopter said it was a catastrophic mechanical failure. He'd just taken off from an airport, and literally the helicopter, catastrophic failure, and it dropped out of the sky, and he had no hope. No one should have to die like that. It's dreadful. He was a hero to the end. So that's another thing. He's a hero to all of us. And to his boys, he'll always be a hero.
Elspeth Murray, aunt to Tom Frith, who died this week in Canada. It's news time, 8 o'clock.